The Book of Genesis, Volume 7, Chapter the 39th, Number 4954. In the prefatory remarks to the preceding chapter, the Lord's words in Matthew concerning the judgment upon the good and evil were explained. There must now be explained the subsequent words, namely, "Then shall the king say to them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, possess the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and ye gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me." Number 4955. What these words involve in the internal sense will appear from what follows. Be it known in the first place that the works here enumerated are the very works of charity in their order. This no one can see who is not acquainted with the internal sense of the word, that is, who does not know what is meant by giving the hungry to eat, giving the thirsty to drink, taking in the stranger, clothing the naked, visiting the sick, and coming unto those who are in prison. He who thinks of these acts from the sense of the letter only infers that they mean good works in external form, and that there is nothing mysterious in them beyond this. And yet there is something mysterious in each of them, which is divine, because from the Lord. But the mystery is not at this day understood, because at this day there are no doctrinals of charity. For ever since men have separated charity from faith, these doctrinals have perished, and in place of them have been invented and received the doctrinals of faith, which do not at all teach what charity is, and what the neighbor. The doctrinals existing among the ancients taught all the genera and species of charity, and also who the neighbor is towards whom charity is to be exercised, and how one neighbor differs in respect and degree from another, and consequently how the exercise of charity varies in its application to different persons. They also grouped the neighbor into classes, and assigned them names, calling some the poor, needy, miserable, afflicted, some the blind, lame, halt, and also fatherless and widows, and others the hungry, thirsty, strangers, naked, sick, bound, and so on. Thus they knew their duty to the one and to the other. But as before said, these doctrinals perished, and with them the understanding of the word, so that no one at this day knows that by the poor, the widows, and the fatherless in the word, any others are meant than those who are so called. The same applies here to the hungry, the thirsty, the strangers, the naked, the sick, and those who are in prison. Yet by these is described charity, such as it is in its essence, and the exercise of charity, such as it must be in its life. Number 4956. The essence of charity to the neighbor is the affection of good and truth, and the acknowledgement of self as being evil and false. Yea, the neighbor is good and truth itself, and to be affected by good and truth is to have charity. The opposite to the neighbor is evil and falsity, which are shunned by one who has charity. He therefore who is charitable to the neighbor is affected by good and truth, because these are from the Lord. And he shuns evil and falsity, because these are from self. And when he does this, he is in humiliation from self-acknowledgement. And when in humiliation, he is in a state of reception of good and truth from the Lord. These are the characteristics of charity which in the internal sense are involved in these words of the Lord. I was hungry, and ye gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. That such things are involved in these words, no one can know except from the internal sense. The ancients who possessed the doctrinals of charity knew these things, but at this day they seem so remote that everyone will be surprised to hear that they are involved. Moreover, the angels who are with man understand these words in no other way, for by the hungry they understand those who from affection desire good, by the thirsty those who from affection desire truth, by a stranger those who are willing to be instructed, by the naked those who acknowledge that there is nothing of good and truth in themselves, by the sick those who acknowledge that in themselves there is nothing but evil, and by the bound, or those who are in prison, those who acknowledge that in themselves there is nothing but falsity. If these things are brought together into one sense, they signify what has been stated just above. Number 4957. From all this it is evident that there were divine things in everything the Lord said, although to those who are worldly minded, and especially to those who are carnally minded, his words appear to be such as any man might say. Nay, those who are carnally minded will say of these and all other words of the Lord, that they have not so much grace, and therefore not so much weight, as the discourse and preaching of those of the present age who speak with eloquence and learning. Yet the discourse and preaching of these are like husk and chaff in comparison with the kernel. Number 4958. To hunger is to desire good from affection, because bread in the internal sense is the good of love and of charity, and food in general is good. To thirst is to desire truth from affection, because wine and also water denote the truth of faith. For wine and for water see Numbers. That a stranger is one who is willing to be instructed may also be seen above. That the naked mean those who acknowledge that there is nothing of good or truth in themselves, the sick those who acknowledge that they are an evil, and the bound, or the prisoners, those who acknowledge that they are in falsity, is plain from the numerous passages in the Word in which they are mentioned. Number 4959. The reason why the Lord says these things of himself is that he is in those who are of this character, and therefore he also says, Verily I say unto you, insofar as ye have done it to one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it to me. Chapter 39, verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar bought him, Pharaoh's chamberlain, chief of the guards, an Egyptian man, of the hand of the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down thither. 2. And Jehovah was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his lord the Egyptian. 3. And his lord saw that Jehovah was with him, and that Jehovah made all that he did to prosper in his hand. 4. And Joseph found grace in his eyes, and he ministered to him, and he set him over his house, and all that he had he gave into his hand. 5. And it came to pass from the time that he set him over his house, and over all he had, that Jehovah blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of Jehovah was in all that he had, in the house and in the field. 6. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught that was with him, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was beautiful in form, and beautiful in looks. 7. And it came to pass after these words, that his lord's wife lifted up her eyes to Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. 8. And he refused, and said unto his lord's wife, Behold, my lord knoweth not what is with me in the house, and all that he hath given into my hand. 9. He is not greater in this house than I, and he hath not withheld from me anything but thee, because thou art his wife. And how shall I do this great evil, and sin against God? 10. And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her, to lie by her, to be with her. 11. And it came to pass on a certain day that he went into the house to do his work, and no man of the men of the house was there in the house. 12. And she caught hold of him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out. 13. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth. 14. That she cried unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought us a Hebrew man to mock us. He came to me to lie with me, and I cried with a great voice. 15. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment by me, and fled, and got him out. 16. And she laid up his garment by her, until his lord came to his house. 17. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant whom thou hast brought unto us came unto me to mock me. 18. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment by me, and fled out. 19. And it came to pass, when his lord heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, According to these words did thy servant to me, that his anger was kindled. 20. And Joseph's lord took him, and put him into the prison house, the place where the king's bound ones were bound, and he was there in the prison house. 21. And Jehovah was with Joseph, and inclined mercy unto him, and gave him grace in the eyes of the prince of the prison house. 22. And the prince of the prison house gave into Joseph's hand all the bound ones that were in the prison house, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer. 23. The prince of the prison house saw naught of anything that was in his hand, because Jehovah was with him, and that which he did, Jehovah made it to prosper. The contents. Number 4960. In the internal sense here, the subject is the Lord, how he made his internal man divine. Jacob was the external man treated of in the preceding chapters. Joseph is the internal man, treated of in this and the following chapters. Number 4961. And because this was done according to divine order, this order is here described, and also temptation, which is the means of conjunction. The internal sense. Number 4962, verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar bought him, Pharaoh's chamberlain, chief of the guards, an Egyptian man, of the hand of the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down thither. And Joseph signifies the celestial of the spiritual from the rational. Was brought down to Egypt signifies to the external knowledges of the church. And Potiphar bought him, Pharaoh's chamberlain, signifies that it was among the interior things of external knowledges. Chief of the guards signifies those which are essential for interpretation. An Egyptian man signifies natural truth. of the hand of the Ishmaelites signifies from simple good. Who had brought him down thither signifies the descent from that good to these external knowledges. Number 4963. And Joseph. This signifies the celestial of the spiritual from the rational, as is evident from the representation of Joseph, namely, the celestial spiritual man from the rational. Here, therefore, because the subject is the Lord, Joseph represents the Lord's internal man. Everyone who is born a man is external and internal. His external is visible, and is that by which he associates with men, and performs the things proper to the natural world. But the internal is not visible, and is that by which he associates with spirits and angels, and performs the things proper to the spiritual world. The reason why every man has an internal and an external, or is an internal and an external man, is that by means of man there may be a conjunction of heaven with the world. For heaven flows in through the internal man into the external, and thereby perceives what is in the world. And the external man, which is in the world, thereby perceives what is in heaven. It is to this end that man has been so created. In respect to his human, the Lord also had an external and an internal, because it pleased him to be born like other men. The external, that is, his external man, was represented by Jacob and afterwards by Israel. But his internal man is represented by Joseph. This internal man is what is called the celestial spiritual from the rational, or what is the same thing, the Lord's internal, which was human, was the celestial of the spiritual from the rational. This and the glorification of it are treated of in the internal sense of this and the following chapters wherever Joseph is mentioned. But what the celestial of the spiritual from the rational is, has been explained above, namely, that it is above the celestial of the spiritual from the natural, which is represented by Israel. The Lord was indeed born as are other men, but it is known that he who is born a man derives what is his from both the father and the mother, and that he derives his inmost from the father, but his exteriors, that is, the things which clothe his inmost, from the mother. Both that which he derives from the father and that which he derives from the mother are defiled with hereditary evil. But it was different with the Lord. That which he derived from the mother had similarly in it a hereditary like that of any other man. But that which he derived from the Father, who was Jehovah, was divine. For this reason the Lord's internal man was not like the internal of another man, for his inmost was Jehovah. This is therefore the intermediate which is called the celestial of the spiritual from the rational. But concerning this, by the Lord's divine mercy, more will be said in the following pages. Number 4964. Was brought down to Egypt. This signifies to the external knowledges of the Church, as is evident from the signification of Egypt as being external knowledge, that is, external knowledge in general. But the nature of that knowledge, which is specially signified by Egypt, has not yet been explained. In the ancient Church there were doctrinals and external knowledge. The doctrinals treated of love to God and of charity to the neighbor, but the external knowledges were of the correspondence of the natural world with the spiritual world, and of the representations of things spiritual and celestial in things natural and earthly. Such was the knowledge of those of the ancient Church. Egypt was one of those countries and kingdoms where the ancient Church existed. But as in Egypt it was chiefly external knowledges that were handed down to posterity, such knowledge in general is signified by Egypt. And it is for this reason also that Egypt is so often mentioned in the prophetic word, and by it such knowledge is specifically meant. The very magic of the Egyptians also had its origin thence, for they were acquainted with the correspondences of the natural world with the spiritual. And afterwards, when the church among them was at an end, these correspondences were abused by being turned to magic. Now, because they had such knowledge that taught correspondences and also representatives and significatives, and as this knowledge was of service to the doctrinals of the church, especially to the understanding of the things mentioned in their word, and that the ancient church had a word both prophetic and historic, similar to the present word, but yet a different one, can be seen at number. Therefore, by being brought down to Egypt is signified to the external knowledge of the church. As the Lord is represented by Joseph, the statement that Joseph was brought down to Egypt signifies that when the Lord glorified his internal man, that is, made it divine, he assimilated first the external knowledges of the church, and from and by them advanced to things more and more interior, and at last even to those which are divine. For it pleased him to glorify himself, that is, to make himself divine, according to the same order as that in which he regenerates man, that is, makes him spiritual, namely from external things which are matters of external knowledge and the truths of faith, successively to internal things which are of charity to the neighbor and love to him. From this can be seen what is signified by the following words in Hosea. When Israel was a child, then I loved him, and called my son out of Egypt. That these words were spoken of the Lord can be seen in Matthew 2, verse 15. Number 4965. And Potiphar, Pharaoh's chamberlain, bought him. This signifies that it was among the interior things of external knowledges, as is evident from the signification of Pharaoh's chamberlain, namely the interior things of external knowledges. His buying signifies that he ascribed these things to himself. The interior things of external knowledges are those which approach more nearly to spiritual things, and are applications of external knowledges to heavenly things. For these are what the internal man sees, while the external only sees external knowledges in their outward form. Number 4966. Chief of the Guards. This signifies those which are essential for interpretation, as is evident from the signification of Chief of the Guards, namely things essential for interpretation. Things essential for interpretation are those which primarily serve for the interpretation of the Word, and thus for the understanding of the doctrinals of love to God and of charity to the neighbor, which are from the Word. Be it known that the external knowledges of the ancients were altogether different from those of the present day. As before said, the external knowledges of the ancients treated of the correspondence of things in the natural world with things in the spiritual world. The knowledges which are now called philosophic, such as those of Aristotle and others like him, were unknown to them. This is evident also from the books of the ancients, most of which were written in language that signified, represented, and corresponded to interior things, as is evident from the following instances, not to mention others. They located Helicon on a mountain, and by it they meant heaven. They gave to Parnassus a place below on a hill, by which they meant external knowledges, where they said that a flying horse called Pegasus broke open a fountain with his hoof. The sciences they called virgins, and so on. For they knew from correspondences and representatives that a mountain denotes heaven, a hill that heaven which is beneath, or which is with man, a horse the understanding, the wings with which he flew, spiritual things, a hoof, the natural mind, a fountain, intelligence, the three virgins who were called the Graces, affections of good, and the virgins who were called the Muses, affections of truth. So also they assigned to the sun horses, whose food they called ambrosia, and whose drink they called nectar. For they knew that the sun signified celestial love, horses the intellectual things therefrom, and that food signifies celestial things, and drink spiritual things. From the ancients also there still survives the custom for kings at their coronation to sit upon a silver throne, to be clothed with a crimson robe, to be anointed with oil, to wear a crown on the head, and to carry a scepter, sword, and keys in their hands, to ride in royal pomp upon a white horse whose hoofs are shod with silver, and to be waited on at table by the chief men of the kingdom, and so on. For they knew that a king represented divine truth from divine good, and hence they knew the signification of a silver throne, a crimson robe, anointing oil, a crown, a scepter, a sword, keys, a white horse, hoofs shod with silver, and being waited on by the chief men. Who at this day knows of these significations, and where are the knowledges that teach them? Men call such things emblems, not knowing anything at all about correspondence and representation. All this shows the nature of the knowledge of the ancients, and how it made them acquainted with spiritual and heavenly things, which at this day are scarcely known to exist. The knowledges which succeeded those of the ancients, and are properly called philosophic, rather divert the mind from the knowledge of such things, because they can also be applied to the confirmation of falsities. Moreover, when truths are confirmed by means of such knowledges, they plunge the mind into darkness, because they consist for the most part of mere phrases from which conclusions are drawn, understood by few, and about which even these few are not agreed. From this it is evident how far mankind has receded from the learning of the ancients, which led to wisdom. The Gentiles received those knowledges from the ancient church, the external worship of which consisted in representatives and significatives, and the internal in the things which were represented and signified. These were the knowledges signified in the true sense by Egypt. Number 4967. An Egyptian man. This signifies natural truth, as is evident from the signification of a man, namely truth, and from the signification of Egypt, namely external knowledge in general. And because Egypt is external knowledge, it is also the natural. For all the external knowledge of man is natural, because it is in his natural man, even the knowledge of spiritual and celestial things. The reason of this is that man sees this knowledge in the natural and from it, and that which he does not so see he does not understand. But the regenerate man, who is called spiritual, and the unregenerate man, who is merely natural, see this knowledge in different ways. With the former the knowledge is enlightened by the light of heaven, but with the latter not so, but by the light which flows in through spirits who are in falsity and evil. This light is indeed from the light of heaven, but becomes in them opaque, like the light of evening or of night. For such spirits, and hence such men, see as owls, clearly at night and obscurely in the daytime. That is, they see falsities clearly and truths obscurely. And hence they see clearly the things of the world, and obscurely, if at all, the things of heaven. Hence it is evident that genuine external knowledge is natural truth. For all such knowledge, signified by Egypt, in a good sense, is natural truth. Number 4968. Of the hand of the Ishmaelites. This signifies from simple good, as is evident from the representation of the Ishmaelites, namely, those who are in simple good. Here, therefore, the natural truth, which is from simple good. In chapter 37, verse 36, it is said that the Midianites sold Joseph into Egypt unto Potiphar, Pharaoh's chamberlain, chief of the guards. But here it is said that Potiphar, Pharaoh's chamberlain, chief of the guards, bought him of the hand of the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down thither. The expression here used is for the sake of the internal sense. For in the first instance the alienation of divine truth is treated of, which is not effected by those who are in simple good, but by those who are in simple truth, and are represented by the Midianites. But here the subject is the acquisition or attainment of external knowledges, and of the natural truth which is from simple good. Hence the mention of the Ishmaelites, for these represent those who are in simple good. From this it is plain that the words used are for the sake of the internal sense. Nor is there any contradiction in the historical narrative. For it is said of the Midianites that they drew Joseph out of the pit, and subsequently that they delivered him to the Ishmaelites, by whom he was brought down into Egypt. Thus, that as the Midianites delivered him up to the Ishmaelites who were going to Egypt, they sold him into Egypt. Number 4969. Who had brought him down thither. This signifies the descent from simple good to external knowledges, as is evident from the representation of the Ishmaelites who brought him down, namely those who are in simple good, and from the signification of Egypt, which is meant by thither, namely external knowledge in general. The expression brought down is used because external knowledge is the subject, and this is exterior. For in the word, to go from interior to exterior things is called going down, but from exterior to interior, going up. Number 4970, verses 2 to 6. And Jehovah was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his lord the Egyptian. And his lord saw that Jehovah was with him, and that Jehovah made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his eyes, and he ministered to him. And he set him over his house, and all that he had he gave into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he set him over his house, and over all that he had, that Jehovah blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of Jehovah was in all that he had, in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught that was with him, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was beautiful in form, and beautiful in looks. And Jehovah was with Joseph, signifies that the divine was in the celestial of the spiritual. And he was a prosperous man, signifies that all things were provided. And he was in the house of his lord the Egyptian, signifies that it might be initiated into natural good. And his lord saw that Jehovah was with him, signifies that it was perceived in natural good that the divine was therein, and that Jehovah made all that he did to prosper in his hand, signifies that all things were of the divine providence. And Joseph found grace in his eyes, signifies that it was accepted. And he ministered to him, signifies that external knowledge was appropriated to its good. And he set him over his house, signifies that good associated itself therewith. And all that he had he gave into his hand, signifies that all that belonged to it was, as it were, in its power. And it came to pass from the time that he set him over his house and over all that he had, signifies a second state after good associated itself therewith, and all that belonged to it was, as it were, in its power. That Jehovah blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, signifies that from the divine it then had the celestial natural. And the blessing of Jehovah signifies increase, was in all that he had in the house and in the field, signifies in life and in doctrine. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, signifies that it appeared as if all things were in its power. And he knew not aught that was with him, save the bread which he did eat, signifies that good was thence made its own. And Joseph was beautiful in form, signifies the good of life thence derived. And beautiful in looks, signifies the truth of faith thence derived. Number 4971. And Jehovah was with Joseph. This signifies that the divine was in the celestial of the spiritual, as is evident from the representation of Joseph, namely, the celestial of the spiritual from the rational. And because the Lord is treated of, here as to the internal man in his human, by Jehovah was with him, is signified that the divine was therein. For the divine was in his human, because he was conceived of Jehovah. In the case of the angels, the divine is not in them, but is present with them, because they are only forms recipient of the divine from the Lord. Number 4972. And he was a prosperous man. This signifies that all things were provided, as is evident from the signification of being prosperous when said of the Lord, namely, that it was provided that he should be enriched with all good. Number 4973. And he was in the house of his lord the Egyptian. This signifies that it might be initiated into natural good, as is evident from the signification of a lord, namely, good, of which presently, and from the signification of an Egyptian, namely, external knowledge in general, and hence the natural. To be in a house means to be initiated, because a house is the mind in which good exists, here the natural mind, and moreover house is predicated of good. There is in man a natural mind and a rational mind. The natural mind is in his external man, the rational mind in his internal. External knowledges are the truths of the natural mind, which are said to be in their house when they are conjoined there with good. For good and truth constitute together one house, as husband and wife. But the goods and truths here treated of are interior, for they correspond to the celestial of the spiritual from the rational, which is represented by Joseph. The corresponding interior truths in the natural mind are applications to uses, and the interior goods therein are uses. The name Lord is often used in the word, and one who has no knowledge of the internal sense supposes that the word bears no more than its ordinary meaning. But Lord is never used in the word except where good is the subject, and the same is true of Jehovah. But when truth is the subject, God and King are used. For this reason, Lord signifies good, as is evident from the following passages in Moses. Jehovah your God, he is God of gods and Lord of lords. In David, confess ye to Jehovah, confess ye to the God of gods, confess ye to the Lord of lords. Here Jehovah or the Lord is called God of gods from the divine truth which proceeds from him, and Lord of lords from the divine good which is in him. So in the Revelation, the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And again, he that sat upon the white horse hath upon his vesture and upon his thigh a name written, King of kings and Lord of lords. The Lord is here called King of kings from divine truth, and Lord of lords from divine good, as is plain from the context. The name written is his quality. The vesture on which it was written is the truth of faith. The thigh on which also that quality was written is the good of love. From this also it is plain that the Lord from divine truth is called King of kings, and from divine good Lord of lords. That the Lord is called King from divine truth may be seen above. From this is also clear what is meant by the Lord's Christ in Luke. Answer was made to Simeon by the Holy Spirit that he should not see death until he had seen the Lord's Christ. The Lord's Christ is the divine truth of the divine good, for Christ is the same as Messiah, and Messiah is the anointed or king. The Lord here is Jehovah. In the word of the New Testament, the name Jehovah is nowhere used, but instead of it, Lord and God, as also in Luke. Jesus said, How say they that the Christ is David's son? For David himself saith in the book of Psalms, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand. The same passage reads thus in David, The saying of Jehovah unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand. It is plain that Jehovah in David is called Lord in the Evangelist. Lord there denotes the divine good of the divine human. Omnipotence is signified by sitting at the right hand. When the Lord was in the world, he was divine truth, but when he was glorified, that is, when he had made the human in himself divine, he became divine good, from which thereafter divine truth proceeds. For this reason, the disciples after the resurrection did not call him Master, as before, but Lord, as is evident in John and also in the rest of the evangelists. The divine truth which the Lord was when in the world, and which thereafter proceeds from him, that is, from the divine good, is called also the angel of the covenant in Malachi. The Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, and the angel of the covenant whom ye desire. As divine good is meant by Lord and divine truth by King, therefore where the Lord is spoken of as having dominion and a kingdom, dominion is predicated of divine good and a kingdom of divine truth, and therefore also the Lord is called Lord of nations and King of peoples. For by nations are signified those who are in good, and by peoples those who are in truth. Good is called a lord relatively to a servant, and a father relatively to a son, as in Malachi. A son honoureth his father, and a servant his lord. If then I be a father, where is my honour? And if I be a lord, where is my fear? And in David, Joseph was sold for a servant, The discourse of Jehovah proved him. The king sent and loosed him. The ruler of nations opened for him. He set him lord of his house and ruler in all his possession. That by Joseph here is meant the Lord is evident from the context. The Lord here is the divine good of the divine human. Number 4974. And his Lord saw that Jehovah was with him. This signifies that it was perceived in natural good that the divine was therein, as is evident from the signification of seeing, namely, understanding and perceiving, and from the signification of Lord, namely, good, here natural good, because it is an Egyptian who is here the Lord. That the divine was therein is signified by Jehovah being with him. Number 4975. And that Jehovah made all that he did to prosper in his hand. This signifies that all things were of the divine providence, as is evident from the signification of prospering, namely, being provided. Hence, Jehovah's making it to prosper in his hand denotes the divine providence. Number 4975a. And Joseph found grace in his eyes. This signifies that it was accepted, namely by natural good, which is signified by his Lord, as is evident from the signification of finding grace in one's eyes, namely, being accepted. The expression in the eyes is used because grace is predicated of the understanding, and this is signified by the eyes. Number 4976. And he ministered unto him. This signifies that the external knowledge was appropriated to its good, as is evident from the signification of ministering, namely, being of service by supplying that which another needs, here being appropriated, because the subject is natural good to which external knowledge was to be appropriated. Moreover, to minister is predicated of external knowledges, for in the word a minister and a servant signify external knowledge or natural truth, because this is subordinate to good, as to its Lord. External knowledge stands in the same relation to the delight of the natural man, or what is the same thing, natural truth stands in the same relation to its good as water to bread or drink to food. Water or drink dilutes bread and food, so that they may be conveyed into the blood, and thence into all parts of the body, to nourish them. For without water or drink, bread or food is not resolved into its minute particles, nor distributed for use. External knowledge stands in the same relation to delight, or truth to good, and therefore good has an appetite for and desires truth, for the use it performs to it by its ministration and service. Moreover, they correspond in a similar way, for in the other life man is not nourished by natural food and drink, but by spiritual food and drink. Spiritual food is good, and spiritual drink is truth. And therefore when bread or food is mentioned in the word, angels understand spiritual bread or food, that is, the good of love and of charity. And when water or drink is mentioned, they understand spiritual water or drink, that is, the truth of faith. From this it may be seen what the truth of faith is without the good of charity, and also whether the former without the latter can nourish the internal man. For water and drink alone, without bread and food, result, as is well known, in emaciation and death. Number 4977. And he set him over his house. This signifies that good associates itself therewith, as is evident from the signification of the Lord who set him over his house, namely good. And from the signification of setting him over his house, namely associating itself therewith, that is, with external knowledge or natural truth. That this is the meaning is plain from the words that follow, where it is said that all that he had he gave into his hand. For by this is signified that all that belonged to it was as it were in its power. For good is the Lord, and truth is the minister. And when it is said of a lord that he set a minister over, or of good that it set truth over, in the internal sense this signifies not that it ceded the dominion thereto, but that it associated itself therewith. For in the internal sense a thing is perceived as it is in itself, but in the sense of the letter it is set forth according to appearance. For good always has the dominion, but associates itself in order that truth may be conjoined with it. When man is in truth, as is the case before he has been regenerated, he knows scarcely anything about good. For truth flows in by an external or sensuous way, but good by an internal way. Man is conscious of that which flows in by an external way, but not, until he has been regenerated, of that which flows in by an internal way. So that unless in the prior state a sort of dominion were given to truth, or unless good so associated itself, truth would never be appropriated to good. This is the same as what has often been explained above, that while man is being regenerated, truth is apparently in the first place, or as it were the Lord, but that good manifestly occupies the first place as Lord when he has been regenerated. Number 4978. And all that he had he gave into his hand. This signifies that all that belonged to it was as it were in its power, as is evident from the signification of the hand, namely power. Thus to put into his hand is to put into its power. But as this is done only apparently, it is said as it were in its power. That it is only apparently, or as it were, may be seen just above. Number 4979. And it came to pass from the time that he set him over his house and over all that he had. This signifies a second state, after good associated itself therewith, and all that belonged to it was as it were in its power, as is evident from the signification of the expression "it came to pass," or "it was," so often found in the word, as involving something new, and consequently another state. And from the signification of "from the time that he set him over his house," as being after good had associated itself therewith. And from the signification of "over all that he had," as being that all that belonged to it was as it were in its power. Number 4980. That Jehovah blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. This signifies that from the divine it then acquired the celestial natural, as is evident from the signification of being blessed, namely being enriched with the celestial and spiritual good. And that it was from the divine is signified by the expression Jehovah blessed, and from the signification of the Egyptian's house, namely the good of the natural mind. Hence it follows that by Jehovah blessed the Egyptian's house is signified that from the divine it then acquired the celestial natural. The celestial natural is the good in the natural which corresponds to the good of the rational, that is, which corresponds to the celestial of the spiritual from the rational, which is Joseph. The celestial, like the spiritual, is predicated of both the rational and the natural, that is, of the internal or rational man and of the external or natural man. For in its essence the spiritual is the divine truth which proceeds from the Lord, and the celestial is the divine good which is in this divine truth. When divine truth, in which is divine good, is received by the rational or internal man, it is called the spiritual in the rational, and when received by the natural or external man, it is called the spiritual in the natural. In like manner, when the divine good, which is in divine truth, is received by the rational or internal man, it is called the celestial in the rational, and when received by the natural or external man, it is called the celestial in the natural. Both flow into man from the Lord immediately, as well as mediately through angels and spirits. But with the Lord, when he was in the world, the inflow was from himself, because the divine was in him. Number 4981. And the blessing of Jehovah. This signifies increase, as is evident from the signification of the blessing of Jehovah. The blessing of Jehovah, in the true sense, signifies love to the Lord and charity to the neighbor. For they who are gifted with these are called the blessed of Jehovah, being then gifted with heaven and eternal salvation. Hence the blessing of Jehovah, in the external sense, or in the sense which relates to the state of man and the world, is to be content in God, and therefore to be content with one's actual position and means, whether among the honored and rich, or among the less honored and poor. For he who is content in God regards honors and riches as means for the performance of uses. And when he thinks of them and at the same time of eternal life, he regards honor and riches as of no importance, and eternal life as essential. Because the blessing of Jehovah or of the Lord, in the true sense implies these things, blessing also implies numberless things, and has therefore a variety of significations. For example, to be enriched with spiritual and celestial good, to be made fruitful from the affection of truth, to be disposed in heavenly order, to be gifted with the good of love, and so to be conjoined with the Lord, and joy. What therefore blessing means specifically may be seen from the details that precede and follow. That here the blessing of Jehovah signifies increase in good and truth, or in life and doctrine, is plain from the words that follow. For it is said, the blessing of Jehovah was in the house and in the field. And by a house is signified the good which is of life, and by a field the truth which is of doctrine. From this it is plain that increase in these things is here signified by the blessing of Jehovah. Number 4982. Was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. This signifies in life and in doctrine, as is evident from the signification of house, namely good. And because it signifies good, it signifies life, for all good is of life. And from the signification of field, namely the truth of the church. And because it signifies the truth of the church, it signifies also doctrine, for all truth is of doctrine. House and field are occasionally mentioned in other parts of the word, and when the subject treated of is the celestial man, by house is signified celestial good, and by field spiritual good. Celestial good is the good of love to the Lord, and spiritual good is the good of charity to the neighbor. But when the spiritual man is treated of, house signifies the celestial that is in him, which is the good of charity to the neighbor, and field signifies the spiritual that is in him, which is the truth of faith. Both the one and the other are signified in Matthew. Let him that is upon the housetop not go down to take anything that is in his house, and let him that is in the field not return back to take his garment. Number 4983. and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. This signifies that it appeared as if all things were in its power, as is evident from what was explained above, where almost the same words occur, and also from what was said in number 4977. Number 4984. And he knew not aught that was with him, save the bread which he did eat. This signifies that good was thence made its own, as is evident from the signification of bread, namely good, and from the signification of eating, namely making one's own. His not knowing aught that was with him save the bread signifies that nothing was received but good. It might be supposed that when good makes truth its own, it appropriates such truth as is the truth of faith, but it is the good of truth. Truths which are not for use do indeed approach, but do not enter. All uses from truths are goods of truth. Truths which are not for use are separated, some are retained and some are rejected. Those retained are such as introduce to a good more or less remote, and are of use to it. Those rejected are such as do not so introduce, nor apply themselves. In their beginning all uses are truths of doctrine, but in their progression they become goods. They become goods when the man acts according to these truths. Thus the very action qualifies the truths, for all action descends from the will, and the will itself turns into good what was before truth. From this it is plain that truth in the will is no longer the truth of faith, but the good of faith, and that no one is made happy by the truth of faith, but by the good of faith. For this affects the very core of man's life, namely his will, and gives it interior delight or bliss, and in the other life the happiness called heavenly joy. Number 4985. And Joseph was beautiful in form, signifies the good of life thence derived, and beautiful in looks, signifies the truth of faith thence derived, as is evident from the signification of beautiful in form and beautiful in looks. For form is the essence of a thing, and looks are the manifestation thence derived. And because good is the very essence, and truth the manifestation thence derived, beautiful in form signifies the good of life, and beautiful in looks signifies the truth of faith. For the good of life is the very being of man, because it is of his will, and the truth of faith is the consequent manifestation, because it is of his understanding. For whatever is of the understanding is a manifestation of the will. The being of man's life is in his willing, and the manifestation of his life is in his understanding. The understanding of man is nothing but the will unfolded, and so put in form that its character may appear in its looks. This shows the origin of the beauty of the interior man, namely, that it comes from the good of the will through the truth of faith. The very truth of faith constitutes the beauty of the external form, but the good of the will imparts and forms it. This is why the angels of heaven are of ineffable beauty, being as it were loves and charities in form. And therefore when they appear in their beauty, they affect the inmost mind. The good of love from the Lord shines forth in them through the truth of faith, and affects them as it penetrates. This clearly shows what is signified in the internal sense by beautiful in form and beautiful in looks. Number 4986, verses 7 to 9. And it came to pass after these words that his Lord's wife lifted up her eyes to Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. And he refused, and said unto his lord's wife, Behold, my lord knoweth not what is with me in the house, and all that he hath given into my hand. He is not greater in this house than I. And he hath not withheld from me anything but thee, because thou art his wife. And how shall I do this great evil, and sin to God? And it came to pass after these words, signifies a third state, that his lord's wife lifted up her eyes to Joseph, signifies truth natural, not spiritual, adjoined to natural good, and its perception. And she said, Lie with me, signifies that it desired conjunction. And he refused, signifies aversion. And said unto his lord's wife, signifies perception concerning this truth. Behold, my lord knoweth not what is with me in the house, signifies that natural good did not desire even appropriation. And all that he hath given into my hand, signifies that all was in its power. He is not greater in this house than I, signifies that that good was prior in time, but not in state. And he hath not withheld from me anything but thee, signifies that to be conjoined with the truth of that good was forbidden. Because thou art his wife, signifies because it was not to be conjoined with another good. And how shall I do this great evil and sin to God? Signifies that thus there would be disjunction and no conjunction. Number 4987. And it came to pass after these words. This signifies a third state, as is evident from the signification of it came to pass, or it was, as involving something new, here consequently a third state. And from the signification of after these words, as being after these things were transacted. In the original language, one series is not distinguished from another by intervening stops, as in other languages, but the text appears to be, as it were, continuous from beginning to end. The contents of the internal sense are also in like manner continuous and flowing from one state of a thing into another. But when one state terminates and another of importance succeeds, this is indicated by it was or it came to pass, and a change of state less important by and. This is the reason why these expressions so frequently occur. This state, which is the third, and which is now treated of, is more interior than the former. Number 4988. That his lord's wife lifted up her eyes to Joseph. This signifies truth natural, not spiritual, adjoined to natural good and its perception, as is evident from the signification of a wife, namely truth adjoined to good. Here, truth natural, not spiritual, adjoined to natural good, because natural truth and good are treated of, the good to which this truth is conjoined being here the Lord, and from the signification of lifting up the eyes, namely thought, intention, and also perception. By the wife is here signified natural truth, but not spiritual natural truth, and by the husband, who is here the Lord, is signified natural good, but not spiritual natural good. It must therefore be explained what is meant by natural good and truth, not spiritual, and by spiritual natural good and truth. Good in man is from a twofold source, from what is hereditary and therefore adventitious, and also from the doctrine of faith and of charity, or with the Gentiles from their religion. Good from the former origin is natural good, not spiritual, while good from the latter origin is spiritual natural good. From a like origin is truth, because all good has its own truth adjoined to it. Natural good from the former origin, that is, from what is hereditary and therefore adventitious, has much that is akin to natural good from the second origin, that is, from the doctrine of faith and charity, or from some religion, but only in the external form, being entirely different in the internal form. Natural good from the former origin may be compared to the good that exists in gentle animals. But natural good from the second origin is proper to man who acts from reason, and consequently knows how to dispense what is good in various ways in accordance with uses. This dispensing of what is good is taught by the doctrine of what is just and fair, and in a higher degree by the doctrine of faith and charity, and in those who are truly rational is confirmed in many ways by reason. They who do good from the former origin are impelled blindly, as it were, by instinct to the exercise of charity. But they who do good from the second origin are impelled by an internal obligation, and as it were with their eyes open. In a word, they who do good from the former origin do it from no conscience of what is just and fair, still less from any conscience of spiritual truth and good, whereas they who do good from the second origin do it from conscience. But how it is with these matters can by no means be made clear to the apprehension, for everyone, unless he is spiritual or has been regenerated, sees good from its external form, because he does not know what charity is, nor what the neighbor is. And the reason why he does not know these things is that he has no doctrinals of charity. In the light of heaven these things appear most distinctly, and hence they appear distinctly also to the spiritual or regenerate, because these are in the light of heaven. Number 4989. And she said, Lie with me. This signified that it desired conjunction, as is evident from the signification of lying with me, namely conjunction, but unlawful conjunction, that is, of spiritual natural good, which now is Joseph, with natural truth not spiritual, which is his Lord's wife. The conjunctions of good with truth and of truth with good are described in the word by marriages, and hence unlawful conjunctions are described by harlotries. And so here the conjunction of natural truth not spiritual with spiritual natural good is described by his Lord's wife being desirous to lie with Joseph. Between these no conjunction is possible in internals, but only in externals, in which there is an apparent conjunction, but it is only an affinity. For this reason also she caught him by his garment, and he left the garment in her hand. For by garment in the internal sense is signified what is external, and by which there is an apparent conjunction, or by which there is an affinity, as will be seen below at verses 12 and 13. That these things are signified cannot be understood so long as the mind or thought is intent on the story. For then nothing is thought of but Joseph, Potiphar's wife, and the flight of Joseph and his leaving his garment. But if the mind or thought were intent upon the things signified by Joseph, by Potiphar's wife, and by a garment, it would then be perceived that some unlawful spiritual conjunction is here described. And the mind or thought can dwell upon the things signified, provided it is believed that the historic word is divine, not from the mere history, but from the fact that within the history there is what is spiritual and divine. And if this were believed, it would be known that the spiritual and divine therein concern the good and truth of the Lord's church and kingdom, and in the supreme sense concern the Lord himself. When a man enters the other life, as he does immediately after death, if he is one of those who are taken up into heaven, he will know that he retains nothing of the story of the Word, and indeed knows nothing of Joseph, nor of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He only knows of the spiritual and divine things which he had learnt from the Word and had applied to his life. Such things, therefore, are inwardly contained in the word, and are called its internal sense. Number 4990. And he refused. This signifies aversion, as is evident from the signification of refusing, namely, being averse, that is, to the conjunction in question. For he who refuses even to fleeing away is averse. Number 4991. And said unto his Lord's wife. This signifies perception concerning this truth, as is evident from the signification of saying in the story of the word, namely, perceiving, and from the signification of his Lord's wife, namely, truth natural, not spiritual, adjoined to natural good. Number 4992. Behold, my Lord knoweth not what is with me in the house. This signifies that natural good did not desire even appropriation, as is evident from the signification of his Lord, namely, natural good, and from the signification of not knowing what is with me in the house, namely, not desiring appropriation. That this is the meaning can only be seen from the series of things in the internal sense. For a third state is now treated of, in which the celestial of the spiritual is in the natural. In this state, the natural good and truth which is spiritual is separate from the natural good and truth which is not spiritual, and consequently, not knowing what is in the house signifies that there is no desire for appropriation. But these things, being mysteries, cannot be made clear except by examples. Let the following example therefore serve as an illustration. To be conjoined with one's wife from lust alone is natural, not spiritual. But to be conjoined with one's wife from conjugal love is spiritual, natural. And if the husband is afterwards conjoined from lust alone, he believes that he transgresses as one who does something lascivious, and therefore he no longer desires that this should be appropriated to him. Let the following also serve as an example. To benefit a friend, no matter what his character, provided he be a friend, is natural, not spiritual. But to benefit a friend for the sake of the good that is in him, and still more to consider good itself as the friend to be benefited, is spiritual, natural. And when any one is in this state, he knows that he transgresses if he benefits a friend who is evil, for then through him he injures others. When he is in this state, he holds in aversion the appropriation of natural good not spiritual, in which good he was before. And so it is with everything else. Number 4993. And all that he hath given into my hand. This signifies that all was in its power, as is evident from what was said above, where similar words occur. But there is this difference, that the subject there treated of was the second state, in which was the celestial of the spiritual in the natural, for then natural good applied itself and appropriated truth to itself. In that state good had the dominion actually, but truth apparently. And therefore these words then signified that its all was, as it were, in its power. But here the subject treated of is the third state, in which is the celestial of the spiritual, when it has become spiritual in the natural. And as in this state there is no appropriation, therefore these words signify that all was in its power. Number 4994. He is not greater in this house than I. This signifies that that good was prior in time but not in state, as is evident from the signification of not being greater in this house than I, namely, that the dominions were on an equality, consequently that both of them are prior. From this series in the internal sense it is plain that natural good, not spiritual, is prior in time, and that spiritual natural good is prior in state, as is clear also from what was shown above. To be prior in state is to be more eminent in quality. Number 4995. And he hath not withheld from me anything but thee. This signifies that to be conjoined with the truth of that good was forbidden, as is evident from the signification of withholding from him, namely, being forbidden, and from the signification of a wife who is the one withheld, and is here meant by thee, namely, natural truth, not spiritual. Number 4996. Because thou art his wife. This signifies because it was not to be conjoined with another good, as is evident from the signification of wife, namely, truth adjoined to its good. Here natural truth, not spiritual, to natural good, not spiritual.